Irish spirituality, then and now. This programme explored the strength of the Celtic spiritual heritage, still very alive today in spite of enormous changes in Irish communities. Through the ancient art of storytelling and heartfelt conversations with representatives from pagan, druidic and shamanic traditions, you can embark into a wonderful world of Irish festival, myth and legends, fairies and leprechauns, shamanic drumming and journeying, and druidic ceremonies at the Hill of Tara. Learning how it has evolved over the years and exploring the crucial role of these ancient beliefs in today's modern society. My first guest on this program is Ruth Marshall, storyteller and author of Celebrating Irish Festivals. Ruth, I was wondering if you could tell us about the Irish festivals. I believe there's 8 festivals in total. Can you tell us about each of these festivals, what they mean, and how celebrating these festivals could be helpful to us in these modern times?
We can look at the year as being like a wheel with 8 spokes on it. And instead of how we've come to see time as a straight line with a beginning, a middle and an end of past, present and future, we can start to look at it as something that moves a little, and that we journey through like that wheel turning. So we can think of the years turning. These 8 spokes on the wheel, let's say 4 of them, which form a cross, relate more strongly to the sun, to cosmic events. These would be the winter solstice, the summer solstice, and the 2 equinoxes that kind of divide the year into 4 quarters, solar events. Now, the other 4 spokes on the wheel would be made up of what I'd think of as earth festivals, which would have been celebrated in the past as fire festivals. They're like doorways that mark the opening into each new season. And these would begin with Samhain, which is the beginning of winter, Samhain, Miach, the beginning of spring, Bialcena, the beginning of summer, and Lunaca, the harvest, the beginning of the autumn time. We can look now at each of those. Let's start with Samhain. If we're in the Celtic calendar, that's the beginning of the new year, begins with the winter. Just as kind of in the Celtic tradition, the celebration of a festival would begin on the night before the festival itself. So the new year starts with the winter, the sleep, the dark time before the beginning of the year. So Samhain, then, we all know as Halloween. Samhain is one of those times when the veils between the worlds are thin. It gives us an opportunity to speak to our ancestors. There's the tradition of, children tend to dress up as ghosts and witches at that time of year, which is really just a remnant of our spiritual past, really our heritage, of knowing that this is a time when it's possible to commune with our ancestors, our relatives who've passed on, and with spiritual beings generally, because they're closer to us, more accessible at this time. I mean, in our modern calendar, of course, at that time of Halloween, we also have All Souls and All Saints days, and people traditionally would go and visit the graves of their dear ones, in these times. So there's still the vestiges of that, honouring of the dead, and these things still carry on in the games that are played at children's Halloween parties, the bobbing for apples and the kind of divination games. These are also remnants of that old knowing that this is a time when information's available from the spiritual world much more easily. I think it's time to reclaim Halloween, actually, and try and redeem it from the trick-or-treat side of things and reconnect with that more real aspect of it, where we can deepen our connection with another reality. I know in my own life, I know around from Halloween onwards, I used to suffer with SAD, seasonal affective disorder. This is one of the ways that we are still very connected with what's actually happening in the outside world and the movement of the sun. I mean, a lot of people suffer with this darkness. What we find is an increasing darkness growing within ourselves, that affects our mood. That can be an awful burden when we begin to see it as what it actually is, which is a response to the dying sun, and know that it's not just me this is happening to. This is what's going on with the movement of the seasons. This is what's going on with the sun. This is what's going on all over this half of the globe. It can really help to make sense of that, what feels like inner darkness, that it's not just kind of purposeless depression that one can get lost in, but that one can use this to take oneself deeper into looking at the darkness within oneself and finding the light that is actually still there shining within. The next point on that wheel would be the winter solstice. As a solar event, the solstice is when the sun appears to stand still. For anybody who observes where the sun rises or sets, it gradually moves along our horizon. But for 3 days at the solstice, it appears to stand still. The winter solstice, of course, is the time when the sun is at its weakest. Our hours of daylight are at their shortest and our nights are at their longest. It's the darkest time of the year that's been building up since Samhain. If we choose to work consciously with this, it gives us the opportunity to go into the darkness within ourselves, find what needs to die away, what needs to be let go of, and find that small flame that's still burning even in the heart of the darkness, and honour that within ourselves and begin to nurture that so that we can keep it alight, keep that burning within ourselves. We've still got several months of darkness ahead of us, but it's like remembering this light is born anew. For every day after the winter solstice, the sun's going to start growing a little stronger, and we can know the sun can be born anew in me this day. Our next point on the wheel of the year is the festival of Imbolc, which is, some say, comes from old Celtic words meaning ewe's milk, the time when the sheep who would be lambing around that time of year, their milk would begin to flow. This is also St Bridget's Day. With the festival of Bridget, it marks the beginning of the spring. In the outside world, there's not a lot of sign of spring yet. There's one or two wee flowers that generally appear around this time. The white flowers, the
snowdrops.
The snowdrops. You'd often see celandine as well around this time, these white and yellow flowers. I always see Bridget's Day as kind of like a dawning of hope. There's hope and renewal in these first little signs of growth. It's like the cold grip of the winter begins to be loosened, and things are happening under the surface, getting ready to break through as soon as the earth is warm enough again. And that's kind of why, the day after Bridget's Day in the religious calendar, I think, is Candlemas. And there's a tradition of people lighting candles in the earth itself to warm it up. Bridget's festival I generally see as a bursting forth of hope. You could be planting seeds at that time for what you want to come to fruition in the coming year.
And then we get into the equinox.
Now, the equinoxes are a time when the day and night are of equal length. In a way, they give us an opportunity to find our balance. In between these major festivals, here is a chance to kind of weigh things up, to stand there and look at, how am I? What's still in the dark? What's coming into the light? To stand still for a moment and see and assess, where am I? What's going on? What's gone out of balance? And how can I bring that back into balance? Our next festival would be Bialcena. That's at the beginning of May. By this time, the hawthorn is in flower generally all over the place, bursting out all over the place, making the hedges all frothy and white. And this is a time for really being outside, celebrating life. So at Bialcena, we become aware of the kind of rising power within ourselves and kind of increasing vitality. And these new ideas, these little seeds that we may have planted metaphorically at Bridget's Day, we can really begin to nurture and see these develop. And this marks the beginning of the summer. The next major festival would be the summer solstice. That's around the 21st of June. This is the longest day of the year. At the summer solstice then, the sun is at its absolute height. We spend more of our time outdoors at that time of year, but we can also feel that we're a little out of ourselves. We're it's a very expansive time for us. We can lose ourselves a little, and it's maybe just helpful to remember that that's normal. That's what that time of year is drawing out of us. It's drawing us out of ourselves, drawing us out of our straitjackets of normal life, into the
expansiveness.
Into the expansiveness of the air. We become very airy and a little ungrounded, perhaps. At the same time, sure, don't we really need that? Especially in a climate like ours, we really need that opportunity to take off, some of our layers, both physically and metaphorically, and let ourselves, set ourselves free into that great expansion. following on from the summer solstice, then we're heading towards Lunaca. In many places, kind of as the last Sunday in July, the day when they climb Croagh or Mount Brandon. Lunaca it's like a first fruits. It's kind of the beginning of the harvest. If we go back to those seeds that we planted and the tending of that growth that's been happening over the course of the year. This is when we can begin to see the results of that. You know, if it was a creative project, maybe by now we'll have something come to fruition. There may be a sense of achievement there. From Lunaca, moving on to the autumn equinox around mid-September, which also kind of roughly coincides with Michaelmas, which would be like the time when you'd expect all your harvest to be in. We should certainly be welcoming the results of all that hard work. Again, that autumn equinox, another chance to stand and reappraise and to kind of find one's point of balance again.
Mm-hmm. This goes not as a circle but more as a spiral.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a way that we could look at time differently to the linear concept. While we can see now the year going as a wheel, as a circle that spins around, but when we come back to the same point, you know, to the beginning of that wheel again, we're not quite in the same place. That we've changed through our engagement with the seasons. We're at the same point, but we've maybe, you know, gone up a level. And so it would go year after year, continuous spiral.
So what would be the importance for us as modern Irish citizens to celebrate these festivals? What can it bring to us?
Allowing ourselves to develop a healthy relationship with time can really serve us in this day and age. We live in such artificial environments. Mm-hmm. We can stay up all night and have the lights on and never have to experience the darkness, you know, these days, and we can eat strawberries for our Christmas dinner. You know, we're really kind of out of sync with the natural world and with cosmic realities. Stopping, pausing to notice where we are in the cycle of the year gives us a chance to acknowledge that, you know, we are rhythmic beings and we belong. We're part of this changing cycle of the year, you know, and that our lives are, in fact, enriched by acknowledging that. Mm-hmm.
And I suppose also it's an opportunity for us to come together as a community and make celebration at these points, these 8 points.
Well, absolutely. You know, any chance for a celebration, I'm all for that.
How ancient are they?
These points, on the sun cross, the solstices and the equinoxes, I mean, it's not a matter of how ancient is that. You know, when did the sun start to move around? When did the earth start to move around the sun? You know, this is simply a cosmic reality. It's not something that somebody started celebrating at such and such a time. You know, all over the world, people have honoured these points on the solar year. Mm-hmm. And similarly, the fire festivals, these agricultural festivals, perhaps they relate to the beginnings of agriculture, as they seem to have significance for the moving of cattle to, you know, from the higher to the lower pastures, and for bringing in, you know, grain harvests and whatever. So perhaps they could be seen as relating more to the beginnings of agriculture.
Ruth, you have written a book about the myths and legends of Ireland, and I heard that you're a gifted storyteller. Would you like to share one of your stories with our listeners?
This is a story that's come from part of a long poem about the Battle of Moichira, but this particular section of it seems to me to have particular meaning. It speaks of a time when certain mysteries, let's say, were not appropriate for that time. There are mysteries that are appropriate for particular ages, and certain things have to be shut off and closed down for that time. And you encounter this in different stories. And I know I, for one, would often have seen the people who closed these things down as being the baddies in the stories. But I've come now, over time to see, well, no, this is just, it's another of these rhythmic, cyclical, spiralling things, that there are mysteries that are appropriate for a particular time, for a particular age. And now I think we're at a stage where some of these ancient mysteries need to be revealed, or are being revealed again to us, and we need to allow ourselves to open to this. I mean, they're being revealed to us through stories, through events in the world, and we can read them in the clouds, in the stars, in the in the leaves, in the growth in nature. If we allow ourselves to be open, all of these mysteries are writ down there. If we let ourselves be open, we can read these as if we're reading them in a book. We can read from the book of nature. There was a healer once, Dian Cecht, and he had many children, but two of his children in particular, Miach and Airmid, were also gifted healers. Now, after the first Battle of Moichira, they created a well, the well of Slania, and any of the people who'd been wounded in the battle, they could immerse them in the waters of that well, and they'd emerge from that whole again. The king of the Tuatha De Daan had been wounded in that battle. He had his hand severed, and there was a ruling at that time that in order to be the king, one had to be completely whole. Now, Dian Cecht, he made a hand of silver for the king, and it would function in most of the ways that an ordinary hand could, but it wasn't quite the same. But it served well enough for the meantime. But there came a time when Miach and Airmid, who had been wandering around the country performing acts of healing wherever they were needed, came to the gates of the king's stronghold. Miach spied straight away that one of the guards had lost an eye. He says, well, a guard needs two good eyes to mind his master's gates. I can help you with that. Well, the guard was only delighted. So Miach took an eye from out of a cat, and he placed that into the guard's empty eye socket. Well, like I say, the guard was purely delighted. All day he was delighted he could see again, but that night his eye kept him awake, looking for mice scrambling about. Miach came then the next day to the king, and he sidled up to him and said, I can see that silver hand bothers you at times. I could give you something much better than that. I could restore your own hand that was severed in the battle. Well, Dian Cecht comes in and he says, don't listen to him. He is just a foolish boy. Look what he did. He can take an eye out of a cat, but he can't take the cat out of the eye. Don't listen to him. But the king came to Miach and said, I will let you try. So Miach asked for the king's severed hand to be brought to him, and it was not a pretty sight. He bound it by the king's side for 3 days, and he sang chants and incantations over it for the 3 days. And at the end of those 3 days, the flesh had grown again onto the old hand. For 3 more days, he bound the hand close to the king's heart, and again he sang chants and incantations. And at the end of those 3 days, the blood pumped again in its veins. And for another 3 days he sang and he chanted until the nerves and the movement was restored to the hand, and it was all as good as new. Well, the king felt himself blessed to be whole again, but Dian Cecht was furious with his son for showing him up in front of the king. You think you're a better healer than I am? Well, see how you can heal this. Dian Cecht drew his sword and he smote his son across the forehead, cutting through the skin. The wound was deep. Well, Miach raised his hands to the wound on his forehead, and quickly the wound was healed. Dian Cecht raised his sword once more and he struck his son again. This time it cut straight through to the bone. Once more Miach raised his hands to the wound, and quickly the wound was healed. Well, Dian Cecht raised his sword once more and he struck his son again, this time straight through the bone till the brain itself was showing. And Dian Cecht raised his hands, chanted a little, and the wound began to heal. Well, by this time Dian Cecht was absolutely furious. He raised his sword once more and he was so angry, the full force of his fury, and he struck so hard that his son's head split in two. And this was a wound that Miach could not heal, nor Airmid, his sister, with all her skills. And Miach fell to the ground, dead. Dian Cecht was shaking at what he had done. Airmid took off her green cloak and tenderly laid it over her brother's body. She sat by his side and she sang. Each day, for a year, Airmid came to sit and sing by her brother's grave, bringing a little handful of soil, adding that each day to his grave mound. For 365 days she came, and she sat and she sang. And when the full year had passed, and she came to his graveside again, she saw that it was covered with green and growing plants. And as she looked, she began to notice that where each of these plants grew, that was the part of the body for which that herb held a cure. Airmid took off her green cloak once more and laid it on the ground, and she began to pick each herb one by one and place it on her cloak, noting as she did which part of the body that herb would have a cure for. Just at that point, Dian Cecht comes walking by. And when he sees what Airmid is doing, when he sees the herbs growing on the grave mound, he suddenly, it's as if he loses his mind. He says, "What? Even in death are you a greater healer than I? Some mysteries must remain." And he takes Airmid's cloak and he wafts it up in the air so all of those healing herbs are scattered to the four winds. And that's how it is that even today we are still searching for the right cure.
Thank you very much, Ruth. In conclusion, the underlying message of spiritual leaders in Irish ancient and modern societies shows us the strength and the power of our spiritual heritage and the importance of faith in our everyday lives and in rebuilding a sense of community. You were listening to Irish Spirituality, Then and Now. Produced and presented by Marie-Angéline Lascaux, this program was made with the support of Sound and Vision Broadcasting Funding Scheme, a BCI initiative.